Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to do a little introduction to Anz Grapher, talk about the types of things that you're going to need to do, which types of displays you're going to have to use. There are a couple of them that you're going to use for working with this, and what kind of information you can get from Anz Grapher. It's also going to be a little tutorial on where you can always find help if you get stuck on Anz Grapher. The man that created them all has videos for every one of them, and they're tied specifically to the standards. So we're going to look at the one specifically for our standard that we're looking, because he knows the graphs that you're going to need and the information you're going to need for each one. Okay? So let me set that up real quick. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at this at Anz Grapher, and again, most of you have done this before. It's not new to you, but I'm going to go through it as if you've never seen it before. So in your search bar, if you just type in Anz Grapher, and by the way, that is the only time I'll ever say Nz. That's a Z. I don't know what that's all about. But anyway, but for some reason it always comes out Anz Grapher when I say that. There you go.
How else would you? I say Z, not Z.
Z. I know, y'all say Z. It's okay. So here we go. You're first going to get to this welcome page. Don't worry about the cost. The school pays for it. There's some video tutorials here. New Zealand there. You don't need to click on them here. I'm going to show you where to get to them when you're actually in the program. So all you need to do is just click on Get Started. It's automatically going to give you some graphs and some data. These sample data sets you're not going to use. The help menu is where you will find the video tutorials for every section you do. So if you do your 13 stats, that'll be here too. All right? And so if you look, it's got it by standard. Now, again, you can go into more detail. There's some other detail about just introduction, and there's some other things that you're going to do. So like here, paired experimental data, the arrows graphs, that's the one we're going to be using. But you don't have to know that. You can just come down here to the standard 2.1 statistical experiments, right? And the video for that is right here. So what we're going to do today is we're going to watch this video. So take a few notes about what he's clicking on. And he's also going to talk a little bit about it. It's only 2.5 minutes long, so he doesn't go into huge detail because he's not interested in talking about the analysis of it right now, right? We're just talking about creating it. Now you're going to do an experiment, and you're probably going to have about 20 pieces of data. And instead of typing them into Excel and then copying in here, he's going to show you how you can just put it right in, which is perfectly fine, right? So I wouldn't you write it on paper when you're doing the experiment, and then you can enter it into this when you're ready to put them together.
Wait.
Okay? All right?
How did you get to the list of that?
These, just go to help. And then scroll down and it'll show you that, yeah. Okay? All right, so let me start the video.
In this video, we're going to look at using paired experimental data in Anz Grapher. The first thing we need to do to be able to enter in experimental data is change the data source here to empty data set for editing, like this. This will give us a blank data set which we can use as a blank slate to add information in. So what we do is we add in the number of rows that we need. In this case, we need 10 rows. So we're just going to add in the rows.
But if you had 20 respondents, you need 20
rows. We have 10 rows. Then we come along and we can just type in on this data set what we want to add in. For this example, we're going to look at the heart rate of people before and after doing exercise. So our first column needs to be titled before, and our second column needs to be titled after. The first person has a heart rate of 55 before, and after the exercise they had a heart rate of 112. The second person had a heart rate of 60 before and 99 afterwards. And we go through and we put in the data for all of the 10 different people. Once we finish adding in the data, it's very important to press the Save Changes button here. That saves the changes that we've just made to the data set into our variables. So when we graph it, they actually come up. Now the graph type we're going to be looking at today is the paired experiment. So we click on that. Now we need to select our variables. In this example, the X variable is before and the Y variable is after. This will give us a dot plot of the differences between the before and after heart rates. If we want to add an 8-box and whisker plot, we can do this by ticking the box plots button. And if we want an informal confidence interval, we can get this by clicking the informal CI. If you want a summary of the data, like the mean, the median, and those sorts of pieces of information, you can click the summaries tick box. And the last thing you can do is, if you want to see which point is which, you can click the Point Labels button, and it puts the number of the ID column next to each of the points. The last type of graph that this can draw is an arrows graph. This shows us the difference from the before to the after, so we can see the overall general trend of what's happening. In this example, there seems to be an overall upwards trend from before to after. Again, to copy any of these graphs, you just right-click on it and you go Copy Image or Save Image As. These graphs will also probably need a better title, which you can do by typing in the title here and pressing the Update Graph button.
Groovy music, yeah. Okay, so he kind of went through that very quickly, talking about those. There are some things that that Anz Grapher can do that he showed you that you don't need to do. For example, you don't need point labels. You don't need to know which one is which, because we're just looking at an aggregate. We want to know overall what's happening. So each individual thing, we don't really need that. You also don't need the informal confidence interval, right? You won't need that. We may talk about it in the analysis, but I doubt it. It's something else that we'll be working on. So don't worry about that too much either. You do need to know how to copy those images in, including the raw data set. You need to make a copy of this as well, but you can copy anything in Anz Grapher by simply right-clicking, and it'll give you the copy of the image. So you must include the raw data. You must have that box plot that he created, right? And you must have the arrows graph. Those are the three graphics that you have to have, those pieces of information, right? And if you all type it into Anz Grapher, just like he did, using that blank thing, then it'll always look the same. That makes my life easier, which makes your grade better, right? Have you noticed that yet? No. Okay. So, very important. So here, when you're dealing with this, you're going to have more respondents, right? What's the ideal number, minimum number? We should have 30, but that isn't going to happen because we're going to be dealing with these classes. So you're going to have probably 17 to 20, depending on the class that you go into, right? So you'll put in as many as respondents. Now he had 10, you'll have more, hopefully, right? Okay, and then you'll just select those images. Now you do need to have the summaries. These numbers are going to be very important to you because in the analysis we're going to be talking about things like range, and we're going to be using the upper and lower quartiles, and we're going to be looking at where those things fall, okay? So make sure that you can do that. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to have you go to Anz Grapher. You're going to create a chart just like he did with 10 values in it. I don't care what they are, all right? You might want to bounce around. If you look at his values, the before was always smaller than the after, right? But you would expect that to measuring heart rate after exercise. You expect after exercise your heart rate would go up, right? But that's not always the case. And you might want to type in some values where the after is smaller just to see what that does to your graph, okay? And which, it's not any important. And I don't care what numbers you pick. You just put in 10 fake numbers for before and 10 after. You can label them something differently. Say you wanted to do some other experiment. We've talked about some of these types of things you can label them. Doesn't matter. If you want to call them before and after, that's perfectly fine. It automatically populates the ID. The ID that you put in here doesn't necessarily have to be the ID that you gave to the student in the data, because they're completely random and they are completely anonymous, right? So if you called a student 10 when you did the experiment, but you type her in here as 1, it's not going to make any difference to your data. Okay? Now, it would look a little funny if you did number them and then you changed it later, but when you include it, but I'm not going to be worried about that. It's not going to affect your grade one bit. Okay? So, go to Anz Grapher, just make sure that you can get there. Create a chart like this with 10 values. Pick any 10 before values, any 10 after values. Try to mix it up a little bit. Try to make some where they're the same. Try to make some where they're bigger. Try to make some where they're smaller, just so that you can see what it does to the arrows graph. It makes it a little more interesting to see. Okay?
Wait, so some bigger
So-
and some smaller.
Yeah, so like here, number 1 before could be 55, and after type in 40. See what just so you can see what's happened, what that does to the graph. Okay? All right, I'll pause the video. All right, so when you create these, your arrow graph and your guys, come on, focus. Your arrow graph and your box plot are going to be 2 distinct pictures. So when you you'll do the box plot, you'll do the arrows graph separately, then you'll put both of those into your report. Okay? So you'll just unclick arrows and it'll go back and do the box plot, and then click arrows to go to the arrow one, right? Now, I asked you to do some changing up of the numbers, right? So they weren't all like his. If you notice if you look at his arrows, I know it's behind that box. I don't want to start this video again, though. You'll notice that all of his arrows are pointing in the same direction. Started off, the numbers were smaller, but they all got bigger because it's heart rate, right? But if you pick different numbers, what happened to your arrows? Yeah, they're starting crossing. Some of them went from small to large, but the ones that went from large to small are pointing the other direction, yeah? What happens if you pick exactly the same number? Any of you do that? I know you did. There's some graphs on there, yours, right? It just went straight down because it's exactly the same value. Okay? And we're going to learn how to analyze that information when in our next class. But for now, what I need you to do is be able to make sure that you know how to create it. Go back, watch the video, take better notes if you don't know how to create it. But even if on the day you panic, it's open book, right? So you can always watch the video on the day if you get too carried away, too panicky. But practice this a little bit, because this is all we're going to do today. So just make sure that you can go through and do some more of them, and practice it a little bit. Okay? All right.